everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is attorney Jo-Anna Nieves. Jo-Anna, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Brittany. Thanks so much for having me.
For years, there have been questions surrounding the case of disgraced sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who died by suicide in jail in 2019 after being charged with sex trafficking minors. People demanded the release of more documents pertaining to the Epstein case, including a supposed client list. I want to talk about the latest development in this story. Earlier this month, the DOJ released a memo essentially saying they are not releasing any more documents in regards to this case, in regards to Jeffrey Epstein. So to start off the conversation, from your perspective as an attorney, what do you make of that?
I have a number of different perspectives on this. From the start, whether or not there's this client list, I think the DOJ FBI memo is really particular in the words that they choose, right? They say that there is no client list. There is no credible evidence regarding anybody engaged in blackmailing prominent individuals, and they were unable to uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation. When I read that as a lawyer, I said, oh, nice wordsmithing there, because it still leaves questions for the citizens who want the release, who want the transparency. I think that there is more to be seen. Sorry, it looks like you're about to ask a question.
No, all I was going to ask is what are the questions you have? Because I'm sure as an attorney, words are everything. The specific words you choose hold so much more weight, I think, than the average person. So you're reading this. What are the questions that are popping around in your mind?
Oh, absolutely. It leaves room to walk things back, which is what we're seeing here, right? Well, there isn't and it's in quotations. When you look at that DOJ FBI memo, there isn't a client list. Okay, sure. But that doesn't mean that there aren't names in here. That doesn't mean that there isn't identifying information of who may have been where and what acts they may have been engaged in, even if it wasn't enough to support or predicate an investigation. That's all it's saying, right? Like, well, we don't have enough information, or there wasn't evidence that would lead us to predicate an investigation. Doesn't mean that there isn't anything there, which we hear, the administration themselves even acknowledging, well, there is something now, but it's all falsified and forged, or, it's a Democrat hoax, which leaves everybody to wonder, well, then what is it? If it's fabricated or it's made up, why won't you just release it? What are we trying to cover up? Why are we choosing our words so carefully? Why are we backpedaling on the things that were promised in the campaign?
And I think that's a good point, because people now are talking about Epstein arguably more than ever now that the government is saying, don't talk about it. We're done talking about it. And I think that the biggest question people have surrounds this client list, because Jeffrey Epstein was sitting in jail for charges against him of allegedly sex trafficking minors. His associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, is serving years in jail, and I want to read her charges. Conspiracy to entice minors to travel and to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, transporting a minor to participate in illegal sex acts, sex trafficking conspiracy, and sex trafficking of a minor, per the Southern District of New York. Those are really just heinous, disturbing crimes. And the biggest question people have are, well, if they're sitting in jail for sex trafficking, who were they sex trafficking to? Who were Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Do you think that the government knows this? They said no client list, but who are those people? I think that's the biggest question people have.
Yeah, it could be that maybe they haven't been able to identify yet who the people were, or, based on the language that was in this memo, right? We couldn't uncover evidence that would predicate the investigation into these uncharged third parties. But the way it's written sounds like there are third parties. So maybe if there's video, the video isn't a full profile. Maybe if there's messages or communications, it's used under an alias that they haven't been able to uncover who the people are. There may be mentions of actual names, but tying the pieces together is still something that they weren't able to do. And maybe they put a pause on doing it.
And Attorney General Pam Bondi, she's under fire from a lot of people saying, hey, you promised us more things. She said she had the client list sitting on her desk. Then she walked that back saying, no, I meant all of the files. She released Epstein documents phase one back in February. And people were annoyed that there wasn't that much new information in those files. There was a lot of redacted information. I mean, realistically, what information could people have gotten their hands on?
Absolutely. I think, we've heard that about the flight logs. We know that there's likely email communications. I mean, there's 300 gigabytes of data that they went through. And even in the memo, it acknowledges that there were 10,000 images and videos of pornographic material involving minors. So obviously, I don't think that the release of victim information and victim identities and things along those lines are things that we're going to get our hands on, or that we should get our hands on. However, there is likely identifying information, whether it's been by nickname, code name, email, phone number, that people could get their hands on.
And then I guess my other question to you is, from your perspective as an attorney, why do you think there was this 180? Because politically speaking, this was big for the right wing. They were running on, we're going to release the Epstein files, we're going to release the Epstein documents, everything that we have, we are going to give to the public. Now there's a lot of walking that back, saying there's nothing to see here. Why are we so focused on Epstein? Legally, why do you think there's that 180?
Answering this from a legal perspective is difficult when so much of this is politically charged. I think a lot of this has to do with the who is being identified in there, and more so than the what. I mean, we know from a legal perspective that the conduct is obviously egregious. The president himself has called it sordid. I think that it's been sufficient enough to garner a conviction in the Ghislaine Maxwell matter. And obviously, she was a primary associate and co-conspirator in the conduct with Epstein. I think that it was enough to obtain a conviction against him if it was to have proceeded to trial. But here we are. So the what about is in there. We know it's bad. But I think the stepping back is that there's some political pressures about who may be involved, and people have seen this. And now we've seen even people who have information have been dismissed. Comey was just dismissed from her role.
And I think part of the reason why people are so fired up about this list in particular is, I mean, the crimes that Epstein allegedly committed, the crimes that Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty of. I mean, they're just so horrific. And clearly, it seems to be indicative of a larger web here, and people just want to get to the bottom of it. But do you think, A, as an attorney, we are ever going to get to the bottom of it? And B, what do you think people who might not be practicing law are misunderstanding about this case or the procedure or the documents that they want?
I'll take the document portion first. I think what people are misunderstanding is it even though there is a right of the public to have access to information and be invested in what's happening in our courtrooms, there are safeguards to protect those individuals who are vulnerable, who've been victimized, prevent them from being re-traumatized again, prevent access to them. And so I think what we are going to see is that the courts need to make decisions about what gets released with those interests in mind, privacy versus public interest. However, it doesn't mean that the access is impossible. There's ways to redact information, share what is going to help with the investigation and prosecution of the perpetrators of crimes versus putting victim information on display. And then as to the first part, in terms of looking at this from a legal perspective, I think that what we're looking at is that you can't take away the fact that this is heinous behavior. I mean, an allegation is one thing, which you're innocent until proven guilty, right? And I think some of the concern about releasing names without sufficient evidence is kind of that stain and stigma that becomes associated with guilty by association. However, if there is enough evidence, whether it's probable cause to charge it and then enough to prove the elements beyond a reasonable doubt, the conduct is egregious. And those people, whether you're on one side of the party or another, can agree that those people who have engaged in that type of conduct need to be held accountable.
And I know that we started this conversation out with you saying you thought that the memo's language from the DOJ is purposeful. Do you anticipate, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but because you're seeing this backlash, do you anticipate we're going to see much more information? I mean, what specifically are you looking out for next?
I do think that the pressure is not going to let up. I do think that we're going to see more information. It may be heavily redacted. There's probably no real way of getting around the release of more information. However, there are things that could be done to kind of stall it out. And I think that's what we're going to end up seeing.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for. I do have a feeling that this story is not over. And I hope you can come back on to break down this case as well as other ones as we see them. Jo-Anna Nieves, thank you so much for joining me. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much, Brittany.